Steve Harvey had asked this question 1,000 times before. It was part of his rhythm, part of the joy that made Family Feud sparkle. "Name your dream vacation destination," he said, flashing that million-dollar grin that always got the crowd roaring. The studio lights burned warm against his face. The laughter echoed. The energy pulsed. And then something shifted. The woman in the red dress stepped forward. Her name tag gleamed under the spotlights. Her hands trembled just enough to catch Steve's eye. She opened her mouth to answer, but the words that came out were not what anyone expected. It wasn't an answer about beaches or Paris or Hawaii. It was a confession, raw, breaking, and so full of quiet pain that the entire room went still. For the first time that afternoon, Steve's famous smile disappeared. That moment would echo across millions of screens, but its roots stretched back far beyond the stage. To truly understand what was happening inside that Atlanta studio, you had to go back months earlier, to a hospital room in Phoenix, Arizona. That's where Lisa Morrison's story really began. She had been a school teacher once, one of those people who made even math feel like art. Her classroom was full of laughter, paper crafts, and the sound of children calling her Miss M. But one morning while writing on the whiteboard, a sharp pain shot through her abdomen. It was the kind of pain that didn't fade. By the end of that week, she was lying on an exam table, staring at the ceiling while a doctor with tired eyes whispered the words no one ever wants to hear. Stage 4, pancreatic cancer. For 8 months, Lisa's world shrank into a blur of white walls, IV tubes, and whispered updates. Her husband Tom became her caretaker, her sister Rachel her anchor. But through every round of chemotherapy, every sleepless night, one small light kept flickering. Her daughter Emma. She was only 9. A little girl with curls that never behaved and laughter that made even the nurses smile. Every night, when Lisa could barely lift her head, Emma would climb into bed beside her with a plate of dinner and the TV remote. "Family Feud time," she'd whisper, pressing play. Together they'd laugh at Steve Harvey's jokes, guessing the answers out loud like contestants. And one night, as Lisa chuckled through the pain, Emma turned to her and said something that would change everything. "Mama, when you get better, promise you'll go on that show. Promise you'll make Steve laugh." It was such an innocent dream, spoken between episodes, but Lisa made that promise. Back then, she still believed in tomorrows. So she filled out the online application, never thinking it would matter. Weeks later, she got the email. "Congratulations, your family has been selected." That was before the diagnosis worsened, before the doctors said the word terminal. When the show date finally came, Lisa's oncologist begged her not to go. "Lisa, you're too weak," he said gently. "The travel alone could be dangerous." But Lisa's answer was steady. "I promised Emma. I'm keeping it." The morning of the taping, she could barely zip her dress. The red one, her favorite color, Emma's favorite too. Tom helped her into it. Rachel fixed her wig, and together they boarded the flight from Phoenix to Atlanta. Every step through the airport was a battle. By the time they reached the studio, Lisa was pale, trembling, and leaning heavily on her husband's arm. But when the bright lights hit her face, something inside her came alive again. The laughter, the noise, the energy. It was like stepping out of sickness and into life, even if just for an hour. Steve Harvey was in his element that day. He had already filmed 2 episodes back to back and was cruising through the third. The audience, 300 strong, was electric, cheering for every buzzer, roaring at every ridiculous answer. Lisa stood behind the podium, heart hammering, pretending she wasn't afraid of collapsing. Every round, Steve cracked jokes that made her smile, even through the exhaustion. For a few precious moments, she wasn't a patient. She was just Lisa again, a wife, a sister, a mother keeping her word. Her team, the Morrison family, was winning. With each correct answer, their points climbed. They had 247, just shy of victory. One final question stood between them and the $20,000 grand prize, money that could help cover her experimental treatment. Steve turned, card in hand, grinning. "All right, Lisa, this one's for the win." He leaned toward her. "Name your dream vacation destination." For most people, it would have been easy. Paris, Hawaii, the Bahamas. But for Lisa, the word dream struck deeper than anyone could see, because her dreams no longer stretched across oceans or beaches. They were smaller now. Hospital corridors, a daughter's laughter, one more sunrise. She opened her mouth to answer, but her voice broke. I just, her eyes filled. I just want to leave the hospital. The crowd fell silent. Steve's grin faded. Time itself seemed to pause. Cameras still rolling, audience holding its breath. And as those 7 words echoed through the studio, no one yet realized that a game show built for laughter was about to become a stage for grace. For a few long seconds, no one moved. The applause lights flickered above the crowd, still waiting for a punchline that never came. Steve Harvey stood frozen behind his podium, cue cards in hand, his usual grin gone. He had heard thousands of answers over the years, some hilarious, some ridiculous, some shocking, but never this. I just want to leave the hospital. The words echoed again, softer this time, swallowed by the stunned silence of 300 people who moments earlier had been laughing. Somewhere in the audience, someone gasped. Another person whispered, "Oh my God!" The room, once electric, now felt like a church after a prayer that went too deep. Steve blinked, trying to find his voice. "What did you say, sweetheart?" he asked, his tone no longer the playful host's, but something quieter, rawer. Lisa swallowed hard, her trembling hands gripping the podium. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears now rolling freely down her cheeks. "I didn't mean to. I've been in and out of hospitals for 8 months. I have stage 4 pancreatic cancer. My doctors say I might have 6 weeks left." Her words broke, but she pushed through them, each syllable trembling under the weight of truth. "My little girl, she loves this show. She told me to come here and make you laugh. I promised her I would." The studio audience fell completely silent. Not even the cameras dared to move. Steve lowered his cue cards slowly, eyes locked on Lisa. In that moment, the show, the lights, the rules, the laughter, all felt painfully small. He had built a career on humor, on turning chaos into comedy. But this wasn't a punchline. This was real life, bleeding through the script. And for the first time in years, he didn't know what to say. Lisa's sister, Rachel, placed a shaking hand on her shoulder. Tom stepped closer, his face pale and tight, the way a man looks when holding back years of fear. Lisa was apologizing again, as if her truth had broken some rule. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to stop the show." Steve took a deep breath and set the cards on the podium. No, baby," he said softly. "You don't ever be sorry for being real." His voice cracked, just slightly. The kind of crack that told everyone in the room this was no longer a performance. He looked up at the cameras. "Cut the tape," he said. The director's voice came through the speakers. "Steve, we're still rolling." But Steve didn't move back to his mark. He didn't smile for the lens. "I said stop," he repeated, firmer now. Then he walked, not as a host, not as a star, but as a man, across the stage toward Lisa. Every eye followed him. The crowd, the crew, even the camera operators forgot their jobs. Steve stopped beside her podium and reached out, taking Lisa's hands in his. Her skin was cold, fragile, but steady. "Lisa," he said gently, "what's your daughter's name?" She blinked through tears. "Emma. She's 9. She watches you every night. She thinks you're the funniest man alive." Steve exhaled slowly, his own eyes glistening. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The set lights dimmed slightly, as if the universe itself had decided to lower its voice. The audience watched a man who had made millions laugh stand face to face with the one woman who had just reminded him why laughter mattered at all. Then Steve turned, still holding her hands, and looked directly at the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice trembling but strong, "I need you to understand something. I've been hosting this show for 17 years. I've asked thousands of questions, handed out prize money, tried to make folks laugh, but right now none of that matters." His words carried through the studio like a sermon. What matters is this woman, this mother, who came here sick, in pain, with limited time, just to keep a promise to her daughter. That's real courage. That's real love. He turned back to Lisa, squeezing her hand. You showed up. You're here. And that means more than any answer, any points, any money. The crowd couldn't hold back anymore. Tears streamed down faces across the room. Rachel sobbed openly, clutching Tom's arm. Even the camera operators wiped their eyes. Steve looked toward his producers again. They've got 247 points, he said. You know what? I'm giving them the win. A murmur ran through the studio, a confused blend of applause and disbelief. Steve raised his hand to quiet them. No, I mean it. They win. I don't care about the rules right now. He gestured toward the scoreboard. Lisa Morrison's family wins. $20,000. The room erupted, but this time the applause wasn't for entertainment. It was for something pure, a sound of gratitude, of unity, of people realizing they had just witnessed something far bigger than a game. Lisa stood there shaking, tears running down her face, trying to speak. You don't have to, she began, but Steve interrupted softly. Yes, I do. He smiled faintly, eyes still wet. Because your little girl needs to see her mama win. And in that moment, every rule bent beneath the weight of compassion. A show designed for laughter had become a cathedral of kindness. And somewhere far away in Phoenix, a 9-year-old girl would soon turn on the TV and see her mother not as a patient, but as a hero. The applause thundered through the studio like rolling waves, but Steve Harvey didn't step back to his podium. He didn't crack a joke or flash that trademark grin. Instead, he stood beside Lisa, still holding her hands, his face reflecting something few had ever seen from him on camera. Reverence. He took a slow breath and turned once more to the audience, his voice trembling just enough to remind everyone this was no performance. There's something else I want to say, he began, glancing toward the cameras, then back to Lisa. I've made people laugh my whole life, but what this woman just showed me, that's what strength looks like. That's what faith looks like. That's what love looks like. The crowd rose to its feet, clapping, crying, embracing strangers beside them. Even the producers, who had stopped counting minutes and forgotten about commercial breaks, were wiping tears off their monitors. Lisa tried to speak, her voice breaking under the weight of gratitude and disbelief. Thank you, she whispered. You don't have to. Steve shook his head gently. Lisa, listen to me. You kept your promise to your daughter. Now I'm going to keep one for you. He turned sharply toward the edge of the stage, calling out to a man in a headset. Get my foundation on the phone, he said. The stage manager blinked, unsure if he'd heard right. Sir? Steve nodded firmly. You heard me. I want the Steve Harvey Foundation on the phone right now. There was no hesitation in his voice. It carried the weight of a decision already made in his heart. Then Steve turned back to Lisa. You said your daughter's name is Emma? She nodded, tears streaming freely. 9 years old, watches the show every night. Steve's eyes softened. Well, I want Emma to know something. I want her to see that her mama isn't just a contestant. She's a fighter, a hero. And I'm going to make sure she never forgets that. The room went silent again, not in shock this time, but in awe. The game show had become a living testament to compassion. Crew members moved quietly in the background, connecting a call. Steve stayed by Lisa's side, lowering himself to one knee so he could look her in the eyes. You've got enough battles to fight, he said softly. From today forward, you don't worry about money. You don't worry about treatment. We're going to take care of that. Her husband, Tom, who had been trying so hard to stay composed, finally broke. His shoulders shook, his face buried in his hands. Rachel, her sister, reached for him, and they clung together in a mix of relief and heartbreak. Lisa's body trembled, not from weakness this time, but from the sheer weight of grace crashing down on her. I don't even know what to say, she whispered. Steve smiled gently. You don't have to say anything. Just promise me one thing. You keep fighting. For Emma. At that moment, a voice called from off stage. We've got them on the line. Steve nodded, still holding Lisa's hand. Put them on speaker. The microphone caught every word as he spoke to his team, his voice calm but steady. Hey, it's Steve. I've got a mother here, Lisa Morrison. She's fighting pancreatic cancer. Doctors say she's only got weeks, I don't care what it takes. We're covering her bills, treatments, medicine, everything. I want her to spend every minute she can with her daughter." The audience burst into applause again, but this time the sound felt sacred, like the kind of clapping you do when words aren't enough. It wasn't for entertainment, it was for humanity. Lisa leaned forward, tears falling onto Steve's hand. "You don't know what this means," she said quietly. "I was running out of time. And money." Steve squeezed her hand gently. "Now you've got both." As the show went into an unscheduled break, Steve stayed on stage with the Morrison family. Cameras kept rolling quietly, capturing a moment no script could create. "Tell me about Emma," Steve asked, sitting beside Lisa on the edge of the stage. Lisa unlocked her phone with trembling fingers, showing him photos. Emma in her Family Feud t-shirt, Emma blowing out candles at her 9th birthday, Emma holding up a handmade sign that read, "Go Mama." Steve looked at the pictures for a long time, silent. Then he said softly, "That little girl's got her mama's strength." Lisa smiled faintly, her voice cracking. "She keeps telling me I'm her hero. But I'm not. I'm just trying not to be scared." Steve looked at her, his tone low and certain. "Lisa, you've got more courage than most people ever will. You came here with nothing left but your word, and you kept it. That's not just brave. That's beautiful." He looked toward Tom and Rachel. "And I meant what I said. The foundation will help, whatever you need." Tom nodded, unable to speak. He just reached out, clasping Steve's hand tightly, tears falling freely now. When filming resumed, the audience stood again. Steve addressed the cameras, holding up one of Lisa's photos. "This is Emma Morrison," he said. "She's 9 years old, and right now she's watching her mama make history." He paused, voice thick with emotion. "Emma, I want you to know something. Your mama's the bravest woman I've ever met. She came here sick and tired because she promised you she would. That's what love looks like. That's what a real hero looks like." The crowd erupted once more, and as the lights reflected off tear-streaked faces across the studio, one truth hung heavy in the air. That sometimes the most powerful thing a man can do is stop everything and see someone. When the cameras finally faded to black that evening, no one in the studio wanted to move. The applause had turned into a quiet hum, the sound of 300 hearts still trying to process what they had just witnessed. Even as producers hurried to reset the stage for the next taping, something lingered in the air, something holy. Steve Harvey remained on stage, his hand still on Lisa's shoulder, as crew members whispered to each other, some wiping away tears they hadn't expected to shed. For a show built on laughter, this had become a moment built on grace. That night, Steve couldn't sleep. He sat in his dressing room long after the audience had gone home, replaying Lisa's words in his head. "I just want to leave the hospital." They echoed like a prayer, simple, raw, impossible to forget. He looked at himself in the mirror, still wearing his crisp suit, and whispered, "You did the right thing." But deep down, he knew it wasn't about him. It was about a woman's courage to show up, and a little girl's love big enough to move mountains. When the episode aired 3 weeks later, no one expected what would happen next. Family Feud had always been a show for laughs. Families shouting answers, Steve cracking jokes, viral clips of hilarious moments. But this time, there were no punchlines. There was only truth. And truth, when spoken so simply, travels fast. Within hours of airing, social media exploded. Clips of Lisa's trembling confession flooded timelines. Viewers wrote messages like, "I've never cried watching a game show before." One comment read, "Steve didn't just stop the show, he reminded us what humanity looks like." The segment went viral. 200 million views across platforms in just days. News outlets picked it up. Morning talk shows replayed the moment on loop. But the most incredible part wasn't the attention, it was the ripple. Donations began pouring into the Steve Harvey Foundation. Small amounts at first, then hundreds, then thousands. People from across the world wrote messages. "Use this to help her fight." In the first 48 hours, more than $2 million had been raised, all marked for Lisa. Lisa was still recovering from the exhaustion of travel when Tom showed her the numbers. She wept quietly, clutching Emma in her arms. "They don't even know me," she whispered. Why would they do this? Tom smiled, tears in his own eyes. Because they saw you. They saw your heart. Calls began coming in. Doctors offering new treatments, clinics volunteering to take her case for free, a pharmaceutical company pledging to cover her medications. What had started as one woman's dying wish became a movement of compassion. For the first time in months, hope replaced fear in their home. Months passed, and Lisa's condition, against all medical expectation, began to stabilize. Her doctors called it highly unusual. But Lisa had her own explanation. Faith, she said softly during a follow-up interview, and kindness. The world reminded me I still mattered. 2 years later in 2021, she sat across from Steve again, this time on his talk show. The audience gave her a standing ovation before she even spoke. She looked stronger now, her face fuller, her spirit radiant. Steve wiped his eyes as he greeted her. Lisa, he said, voice trembling, you were supposed to be gone by now, and yet here you are. Lisa smiled through tears. I'm not cured, she said softly, but I'm alive. And I think that day, your kindness, the people who reached out, gave me something to fight for. She reached across the table, taking Steve's hand. You gave me more time with my daughter, more birthdays, more mornings. How do I ever thank you for that? Steve shook his head, his own voice cracking. You already did, Lisa. You showed up. You kept your promise. You reminded all of us what real courage looks like. After that day, things changed. Not just for Lisa, but for Steve too. He started hosting differently. He listened more closely to contestants, asking about their lives before diving into jokes. If someone mentioned hardship, he didn't skip past it. He leaned in. Lisa reminded me why I'm really here, he told a reporter later. It's not about money or fame. It's about people. Everyone who steps on that stage has a story, and sometimes the story's the whole reason they're still standing. The impact spread beyond Steve. Family Feud introduced a new policy. If a contestant revealed a serious health crisis on air, production would pause immediately, and the Harvey Foundation would step in. It became unofficially known as the Lisa Protocol. Behind the studio doors, a plaque was installed, a simple bronze plate that read, "Sometimes the most important moment is the one when you stop the show." 3 years later, Lisa was still fighting, still living, still keeping promises. She and Emma would return to Atlanta one final time to visit the studio. They stood backstage, beneath that plaque, hand in hand. Lisa smiled, whispering, "We made it, baby." Emma squeezed her fingers and whispered back, "You did, Mama." When asked in a later interview what she remembered most about that day, Lisa didn't mention the cameras or the prize money or even the donations. She said, "It was the moment he looked at me and saw me, not as a patient, not as a stranger, but as a mother trying to keep a promise. That's what saved me." And somewhere deep in the archives of Family Feud, between laughter and lighthearted fun, there exists one episode that turned a stage into a sanctuary. The day Steve Harvey stopped everything to listen. Because sometimes one person's truth is enough to remind the whole world that kindness still wins.